of Doom was...
Yeah, Temple of Doom was on another planet. As far
That's
as
right.
Yep.
But this one came out with much hoopla and fanfare, and then we started reading the reviews. One of the best, I think, was by Dr. Mike Heiser, who panned it, but he was not alone. And then I saw that you had some things to say about the movie that approached it from another perspective, and I think one that relates to politics, prophecy, and the supernatural. What was your take on Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull?
Well, let me start by saying, like you and Dr. Mike, I am also a fan of the Indiana Jones movies. Love the first one. That is my all-time favorite Indiana Jones movie, when that stone comes rolling down that secret passageway in that temple deep in some jungle someplace in South America. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat.
Mm-hmm.
Just an amazing piece of film, great cinematic touch. But and of course, I went to Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. I had studied about the Crystal Skulls about 5 or 6 years ago, did some research, was thinking about writing a novel with the Crystal Skulls. And yeah, exactly, because it's great material, and obviously someone else had the same idea. But I had high hopes. I went there. I hadn't heard anything about the movie, had no idea where they were going with it. And as I sat there, I was completely blown away in the first scene where they open up a crate, and in that crate is the remains of a extraterrestrial life form, or an EBE, the extraterrestrial biological entity, from a 1947 Roswell crash in Roswell, New Mexico. It's labeled right on the crate, Roswell. So right there, I'm kind of going, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And there's a lot of great chase scenes, which is just typical Indiana Jones. It's like, and the producers even admit this, it is a B movie. They made a B movie. That's what they did. They wanted to make the kind of B movies that was really popular in the 30s and 40s. So it's a lot of tongue-in-cheek and ridiculous car chases where the hero, no matter what happens, escapes. But all that to say, and as most of these, and the title of my piece is Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, entertainment or propaganda. And I espouse to the latter, and I believe it is propaganda. Here's why. It admits all the chase scenes and the car stuff and the shoot-em-ups and all these sort of things. They arrive at the Nazca Plain in Nazca, Peru. And for those listeners who aren't familiar with the Nazca lines and what they are, if you Google that article, Crystal Skull article, I think maybe you guys have it up now, but I know that drywind.com has it up also. And when you look there's a link in that article to the Nazca lines. And the Nazca lines are still very enigmatic, even though some people claim that they think they know how they were made and why, for what purpose. But the bottom line is this: the Nazca lines were never even discovered to the advent of the airplane. In other words, I think it's in the 20s, someone was flying over the area and looked down, and there are these huge glyphs. One is of a hummingbird, one is of a spider, one is of a monkey, and it's just bizarre stuff. In fact, the spider is really a bit of enigma because it's only found in the Amazon rainforest, and the Nazca lines in Peru is one of the most arid areas on the planet. Very, very dry, hardly any rainfall. The Nazca lines only go down into the soil just a few inches, and they're only seen again from the air, which begs the question, why would a group of people create these very elaborate designs when they can't look at them anyway? It makes no sense at all. You know, I mean, can you imagine talking to your group of people in some sort of a tribal setting? Well, we're going to make a picture, but you won't be able to see it when it's done. Which begs the question then, well, how are we going to make the picture? How are we going to know if we goof or not? Which is just, I mean, the whole thing is just so absurd when you really start to run with it and think it through, in my opinion. So they show the Nazca lines, and this, of course, links back to the Crystal Skull. What's also interesting about the Crystal Skull is this is not the typical Crystal Skull that if you Google Crystal Skull before the movie, these perfectly human-shaped skulls would come up, nothing elongated. So they've taken lots of creative license, in my opinion, in that area. And so the skulls in the movie are very elongated skulls. Now, if you Google giant skulls or Nephilim skulls, Nephilim, Nephilim skulls, you will see what comes up are some of these very elongated skulls, which were found in and around Peru. So they're taking a mishmash of things and weaving it into a story. So you need to know that the Nazca lines are true and these elongated skulls are true. Now, some archaeologists believe that this was done by head binding, which they would take an infant and bind the head and so stretch the skull and shape the skull into an elongated shape. In the movie, they also allude to ancient Egypt, where the same type of head binding allegedly was practiced, and the result was this elongated skull.
Some of the depictions of some of the pharaohs show them with very elongated skulls.
Exactly. And this, of course, ties into the whole idea of the Nephilim. For those of your listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, you should, Google that up or Google my name. There's a whole bunch of information that will come up on that. But briefly, just a shorthand is this, that the Nephilim are, in my opinion, the offspring of the union between fallen angels and the women of earth. This is the result of the flood. You can get a reference to this in Genesis chapter 6, and you can read about it there, and also in Numbers 13, when the Nephilim make yet another appearance on the earth. So Indiana Jones and the crew are hot on the trail of this crystal skull. We're trying to find it, and lots of chase scenes are ensuing. And at some point, it seems like there's a huge wasp right in front of me here, so I'm being a little distracted. As you can tell, honey, where's the raid? But
at least not all the bees have disappeared from California.
There you go.
Yeah.
Trying to get there. We go. He's out the window almost. Anyway, trying to get back on point here, they wind up in this very secret ancient ruin of a Mayan temple. A couple of things that the viewers need to know, or your listeners need to know. One, the Mayan religion is all but extinct. Yes, there are somewhat practitioners of that, as I've had a dialogue opened up with a modern-day Mayan priest, supposedly. And but for the most part, the temples that were created by the Mayans are not in use anymore. And so for the purposes of our discussion, we'll call it an extinct religion. It no longer really exists. Certainly, if you say something negative about it, it's not like the backlash that you have with the B'nai B'rith or just whatever organization, the Catholic Defamation League. I mean, you're not going to get that. I don't believe the Mayans, have an apologist group for them. All that aside, all that being said, I should say, we see that Indiana and the crew are in the secret temple, and they take the skull, this crystal skull, and they place it. They're in some sort of an inner sanctum, and in this inner sanctum are 13 skeletons, and on top of each skeleton is an elongated crystal skull. So when the bad guys place the crystal skull on the skeleton, something begins to happen. The vibration happens, and there's a whirling sound in the room, and these skeletons somehow compress into one. And when they finally do that, it's interesting in Numbers 13, by the way, very occultish number, which leads into Friday the 13th, which is when the Templars were rounded up and killed and tortured in France. But that's another story. But these skulls merge into one body, and what we see in front of us is, hold your breath, the extraterrestrial. And it's not a gray. It's not the typical short 4-foot little gray alien with the long and black elongated almond-shaped eyes. It's not that at all. It's closer, in my opinion, to a reptilian. It's tall. It's kind of brown, scaly looking, just a little like E.T. in some ways. Spielberg and Lucas did, after all, combine forces on the thing. The bees. Something's going on here. You have to excuse me. Listeners, excuse me. Hold on. I'm going to swat this little guy. Thank you. Did you hear that?
It came through beautifully.
Thank you. Okay, getting back on track. A little bit of humor here. That was a Yellow Jacket, and they sting without provocation. So
yes, they do.
Take no prisoners here. The bottom line is that, and this is where, I'm watching all this and kind of going, what are they really trying to say? Or what's the underlying message? What's the worldview? What paradigm am I looking at here as an operation? And so the very last scene, and I have to give away the end of the movie. Sorry, folks, if, turn off the dial if you don't want to hear it. But the end of the movie is they have the shot of this huge Mayan temple, and from underneath this Mayan temple that has been buried literally for millennia, is this huge mothership, huge UFO, huge mothership, which then begins to surface, and the Mayan temple crumbles, and everything's swirling and whirling around as a cyclonic wind is emanating from the saucers. It begins to take off, and Indiana and the heroes are looking at this thing, and we watch this huge mothership fly off into the sky and then disappear. Indiana goes, wow, did it go into outer space? And his sagacious mentor says, no, Indiana, it's interdimensional. So here you have, let me just run it by. This is why I take great umbrage in this. Basically what they are saying, and most people will miss this unless they are on the subtitle of my book is The Coming Great Deception of a Luciferian Endgame. So I've written about this. I mean, I'm on board with this whole alien deception thing right from day one. And this is the Alien Gospel 101, and it's being served up in an Indiana Jones movie. Call me paranoid, but there it is. And it's simply this, that the aliens, the UFO people, created the Mayan religion, that they were the gods that the Mayan worshipped. And in the movie, because they allude to Egypt, it's one short stone's throw away from saying that the ancient cultures, including, I'm not making this stuff up, the ancient Jewish religion were in fact nothing more but extraterrestrials posing as these ancient star gods. Now, you would say, Lynn, that's really, really far out and far-fetched. What do you have to back that up with? And I would turn to my book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, where a Presbyterian minister by the name of Barry Downing cites, and this is a quote from my book, and it's quoting from Downing's book, The Bible and Flying Saucers. And I'm going to read from my book now. I quote this from Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, page 214. I quote from Downing's writings because he is discussing the ascension of Jesus. He is equating it to direct intervention from a UFO. Here is what Downing says. But I very much suspect that the ascension cloud was the same UFO which led the Israelites through the Red Sea, gave Moses the commandments, carried Elijah to heaven, descended like a dove at the baptism of Jesus, perhaps carried away bodily at the ascension. This was probably the same cloud which brought two men to meet Jesus at the Mount of Transfiguration, and probably the same type of UFO which brought angels to the shepherds at Christmas. So you can see that this Presbyterian minister who's written the book, The Bible and Flying Saucers, believes he's already on board with the alien gospel, and in fact he's promulgating the alien gospel, which is, once again, that aliens, so-called extraterrestrials, were our progenitors, that the extraterrestrial created the world's earliest religions, including, as Mr. Spielberg and Lucas tell us, the Mayan religion, or perhaps even the Egyptian religion. So I take great umbrage with this, and in my opinion, what we've witnessed is the beginning, it's sort of like the early salvos of the great deception which is coming on the planet, which will fool most everyone.
Now, Lynn, why would it matter? I mean, this is a movie that was produced for entertainment, and everyone who goes to the film is aware that this is a work of fiction. So what's the harm in presenting this kind of an idea in that format?
Well, it's a good question, except that everybody who does anything on this planet, I don't care from Madonna to the Pope, they have a worldview. Now, that's quite a juxtaposition when you think about Madonna and the Pope together in the same room. Okay, just put that in your pipe and smoke it, as they used to say. But here's the deal. Everybody has a worldview. Everybody has a paradigm in which they operate. Nothing is done by chance. Everything is very, very deliberate. And the two premier filmmakers in this country, Mr. Lucas and Mr. Spielberg, have a worldview, and in my opinion, have an agenda. And that agenda is very clearly seen in that movie. And that, in my opinion, it's very, very deliberately done. They know exactly what they're doing when that mothership comes up from underneath the Mayan ruin. You know, Dr. Mike Kaiser had an interesting post in his rant about the movie where he kind of panned it. He said, you know, they could have gone anywhere with the story. They could have, you know, discovered some ancient writing maybe which would have led to some treasure room, which would have led to the cure for some disease, or I mean, whatever. I mean, you could just go a million different ways, and yet they chose this, and they did it in a way which, in my opinion, is very subtle. Most people aren't going to pick up on the fact that what they are really saying is that the Mayan religion was started by extraterrestrials. That's the bottom line, and there's no way to wiggle around that. That the ancient gods of the Mayan were these people, these extraterrestrials were worshipped as gods. And this, of course, in my opinion, is the coming great deception. This is the alien agenda. This is exactly what Barry Downing Jr. talks about in his book. This is the alien agenda. This is exactly what Barry Downing Jr. talks about in his book, Bible and the Flying Saucers. And it's coming on the earth. I believe that this is the great deception, if I can segue a little bit into 2 Thessalonians, where it talks about that the son of perdition, the Antichrist, the man of sin, whichever name you want to call this guy, will not be revealed until the great falling away takes place. In Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, I quote a theologian by the name of Keithley. He's deceased now, and I was able to use his material from 2000, I believe it's like either late 90s or early part of this century. And in it, he believes that this coming falling away will be a deliberate apostasy. In other words, people will deliberately choose to reject the faith. In other words, that Jesus is the Messiah, that he died on the cross and that he rose again from the dead. And when you take that one scripture and you combine it with other parts of prophecy, specifically in Revelation, where it talks about a one-world religious system and a one-world government, both of those ideas and those concepts beg the question, if we're going to have a one-world religious system, how the heck are you going to get 1.2 billion Muslims who believe so adamantly in their cause to convert, to change, unless you have some sort of a mind-bending world event which would shatter everyone's worldview? And as we see in the Indiana Jones movie, Crystal Skull, that type of an event, even though the characters are fiction, obviously Indiana and you know his and all his cohorts in the movie, they're completely mesmerized by what happens. So it's one step away from, can you imagine, and the third book of the Nephilim trilogy is the revealing, and the front cover is a UFO over the old city of Jerusalem. Can you imagine when this thing, when they don't go away, when it's just not one farmer in some land back in, you know, Lubbock, Texas, or Stevensville, Texas, or a few people that see this thing, but it's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people, like the Phoenix Lights, but unlike the Phoenix Lights, it doesn't go away, and it's seen in the daytime, and millions of people see this thing. And at this point in time, this would cause, in my opinion, the great falling away that 2 Thessalonians discusses and talks about.
Now, how will this be exploited, do you think, and who is going to exploit this future event, and to what end? I mean, how do you see this great deception shaping up?
Well, here's one interesting. A lot of things fly through my desk, and I get a lot of email from a whole bunch of different people, you know, pointing me to articles, pointing me to discussions. I chased down a very interesting character in the last month and interviewed this gentleman, and it's part of my newsletter this month. But getting back on track, here's a quote from the Vatican. It's from Times Online. It's June 10th of this year, and this is a Cardinal Turan, and he's quoting because apparently he's saying West's obsession with Islam warns Vatican. So that's the lead story. And then he goes on to say, now, and before I come to the punchline here and tell you why I take such great umbrage with this particular statement here, this man is a cardinal of the Catholic faith. And one would imagine that someone attaining the rank of a cardinal, even though I don't believe in that particular priesthood and that hierarchy, and I don't think it's biblical at all, for the sake of this discussion, let's say that I'm on board with it. You would assume that someone who would attain the rank of a cardinal, and there's only a few hundred of them, by the way, on the planet at any one time. It's not like these guys are, you know, running all over the place. They're rare, very rare, and it's a high honor to become a cardinal. One would assume that they would be steeped in theology, and I'm not talking about dry theology. They would be able to handle the Word of God in such a way that would be incredible erudition on their part. They would be able to look and understand the way prophecy fits, the prophecies concerning the Messiah and Jesus and the blood at the cross and Calvary. They would be able to just talk about and espouse their beliefs on a myriad of topics concerning the Bible and Jesus and the second coming and the first coming and all, you know, everything that you would expect someone that would travel in this and spend their whole lifetime studying and learning and being led by the Spirit of God into truth after truth and revelation after revelation. This is all that to say, to build up to this ridiculous comment by this cardinal, with all due respect to the man. And he replies, yes, people are obsessed by Islam. For example, I'm going to India next month, and I want to give this message that all religions are equal. Sometimes there are priorities because of particular situations, but we mustn't get the impression there are first-class religions and second-class religions. So I'm not making this stuff up. You can go online, take that, Google the article, West Risks Obsession with Islam, Warns Vatican. It's from the Times Online. And this Cardinal to Iran, says that all religions are equal. Well, for someone a man of the cloth like that, and to be elevated to a cardinal, you would assume that that's not what would come from this man's mouth. You would assume that anything but, you would assume that he would say that, and echo the words of Jesus' own words, that no man comes to me that goes to the Father except through me, period. I mean, you would expect that that's what you would hear. Instead, you get all religions are equal. Are we being set up for something? Does this guy know something that the average person doesn't? Has he been kind of brought into the inner circle of what is coming on the planet, which I believe is the full revealing of this extraterrestrial craft? Why has Britain revealed their UFO files? Why has France? Why in the United States, just in the last 6 or 7 months, has the media almost every week now begun to run stories about UFOs? What is happening? What is going on? And from my point of view, I believe this is the coming great deception, that when they finally pull the trigger, which I believe which will come after the Ezekiel 38-39 war in Israel, which we see, that's just a whole topic we can get into if you want, but we see the vitriol and the saber rattling, including Ahmadinejad today talking about Israel is soon going to be destroyed. That's all the guy ever talks about. Mm-hmm. It's all he wants to do is destroy Israel, which again ties into this ancient biblical prophecy, Ezekiel 38-39, possibly Isaiah 17, which talks about the destruction of Damascus. And so let's just say, for the sake of our discussion, Derek, that certain people have been brought in to a so-called inner circle. They now know that we have been visited, that the extraterrestrial presence has been here for literally thousands of years, let's say. And they realize that the revealing is going to happen soon, fairly soon. Would they, in fact, by saying a statement like this, and here's where I'm going with this thing, and this is all conjecture. I'll admit it's conjecture, but it's conjecture based on my, almost 30 years of research on the subject and continuing with the subject on a daily basis. He says that all religions are equal. Well, if this cardinal believes, as Downing believes, Barry Downing, who I quoted from my book, mm-hmm. that E.T. is responsible for all the miracles of both the Old and New Testament. If he believes that, right, if he's on board just like Downing is, just like going back to our Crystal Skull segment, where it's basically saying that E.T. started the Mayan religion, is he in fact saying that all religions are equal because they were all started by the extraterrestrial, which I believe that's the paradigm which he's operating under. Now, I can't prove that, and I've tried to get a hold of the man, but there's just layers and layers, concentric rings around these guys. You just can't get a hold of them. You just can't shoot them an email.
No.
So that's my theory.
And it wouldn't be all that different from what Zechariah Sitchin and Eric von Daniken have been proposing for years, that we are descended from extraterrestrials who seeded the planet. But interesting, though, at the end of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that they say, no, they're not going to outer space. These are transdimensional. In other words, interdimensional. In other words, they're coming from inner space or sideways space or something, as though they've always been with us, which fits the research of guys like Jacques Vallée, who's not a Christian, but an experienced ufologist and researcher, who said these things appear to behave, these things, UFOs, appear to behave more like things moving in between dimensions than things that are violating the known laws of physics. Now the Vatican has also gone out of its way, not the Vatican, but representatives of the Roman Catholic Church have in recent months said, if we were to discover life on other planets, or if we were to discover that there was intelligent life out there, that would not necessarily mean that the Bible is untrue, and these space brothers might, in fact, be Christians too. Are we seeing other statements like that coming from other denominations? Is the Roman Catholic Church sort of taking the lead on this?
Well, that I don't know, but I do know this, that the Roman Catholic Church, you can say what you want, but when the Pope goes someplace, it's huge. It's like he comes to the United States and it's like all the networks cover this thing. It's like somehow this is the real deal. And it's just, I mean, I sat there and prayed, and I said, what do you think about this, Lord? And I realized that some of your listeners who hear my answer, will take offense with it. But I think God is grieved. And I'll tell you why. A bunch of men running around who are celibate, which is, first of all, in my opinion, not biblical. Second of all, the whole hierarchy of the Catholic Church is completely man-made. None of it is biblical in any way, shape, or form. They have obfuscated the truth, the simple truth and the message of the gospel so much that the common man has no idea of what being spirit-led or born again by the living spirit of the living God means, that they're more interested in robes and ceremony and I want a Catholic bash here because there's some Protestant denominations that do exactly the same thing. What's the difference? Mm-hmm. I mean, anything that gets in the way, anything that elevates itself above the simple message that you can be free. It says in the Word that, I'm preaching here a little bit, that if Christ sets you free, if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. And that happens when a person is connected spiritually talk about interdimension. When that Spirit of a living God comes upon and then dwells within that person, life begins to change and begins to change dramatically. And that's the experience that the early church experienced, certainly the early apostles and the believers. Remember when Peter preached, 3,000 people come that first day and become believers, and the thing spreads throughout the ancient world. And it, in my opinion, it guys, and I watching this when I saw the Pope, and I was watching some of it, and a lot of what he said I agree with. I thought the message that he said was in some ways very, very, very timely and very, very well spoken. But there was some guy next to him with this huge hat with all these jewels in it. It's like, what is that about? I mean, what does that have to do with anything? And it's all man-made. It's no different than the Pharisees of old and some of the nonsense we see on Christian TV today. It's the same. It obfuscates the simple message of the gospel. I just want to say one more thing on that. And, because I don't know really each person that listens to your, downloads the podcast and checks this stuff out. But I will say this, and I say this constantly to try to make it as clear as possible. When we take a look at the mythos, and let's call it mythos, because I have no way of proving to you whether it's true or not, other than my own experience, what I've been experiencing for almost 28 years, over 28 years. But let's just say that the mythos of this Bible, these stories that were handed down to us, are true. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a story of, I think, 10 lepers. And leprosy in the ancient world was a death sentence. If you had leprosy, that was it. Your goose was cooked, no pun intended. Mm-hmm. You would watch your skin literally rot off your bones. Your fingers would dissolve. It was just horrible. And it was contagious. And so that's why lepers banded together and they would yell, unclean, unclean, so everyone would be able to get out of their way. This is all documented. I'm not making this stuff up. There was no cure for leprosy in the ancient world. No cure at all. It was a death sentence. So we see Yeshua, or Jesus, who's in a crowd, and the mythos, the story tells us that there were 10 lepers, and they yelled from him from afar off, will you heal us? And Yeshua, which I like Aramaic name better than the Jesus name, because it's like, if Jesus is so overused today, if I say Jesus, most people turn off a dial. Mm-hmm. But if I say Yeshua, at least people will listen. So Yeshua heals them. And here's the deal. Strip away all the churches, all the stained glass window, all the vestments, all the pulpits, all the buildings, all the TV evangelists. Just strip it all away and go back to the story. One man, Yeshua, heals 10 lepers. That's a good thing. You can't argue with that. You want to be near someone like that. That's wonderful. That's one mythos story. How about another story? There's Yeshua's on a boat. His group of followers are with him. There's this huge storm on the sea. The boat's tossing and turning. Waves are crashing on the ship. Everyone's panicking. My God, we're going to capsize. We're going to drown. It's the end. Lightning, thunder, wind, the whole yards. They finally wake up Yeshua. He looks at them and says, "Oh, ye of little faith." And he just says, "Be still." Hold your yards. They finally wake up Yeshua. He looks at them and says, "Oh, ye of little faith." And he just says, "Be still." 2 words, be still, and all of a sudden, and not slowly apparently when you read the text, mm-hmm. Not slowly, it's just like whoosh, It's like the switch is just turned off and there's zero after effect. It's like, it's not this slow, okay, now it's 50 miles an hour, now it's 40 mile an hour winds, or 20. It's just like, whoosh. The whole thing just stops. And immediately it says the lake was calm. I mean, that's unbelievable. You can't argue with that. If the mythos is true, that's a great thing. One more story, quick story. Yeshua is teaching. There's about 5,000 men. So with women and children, there could have been as many as 15 or 20,000 people in this throng. But they're in sort of a remote place because they followed him out to this remote place, and it's now growing late in the day, and they've had nothing to eat and drink. So the disciples are kind of freaked out. What do we do? How do we make this thing work? And Yeshua says, what have you got? And they say, well, we've got some loaves and fishes, which is certainly not enough. They got a couple of fish and a couple of loaves, not enough to feed, 10 people, let alone 20,000 people.
A crowd the size of a small town, right?
Exactly, 20,000 people. And Yeshua blesses the food, and they divide it, and they feed the let's say for our purposes, 15 to 20,000 people, and have baskets of food left over. You can't argue with that stuff. It's all good. He was all good all the time. The guy was just amazing. I believe he was a God man, and I believe he was the Messiah, which is, and so, getting back on point here, I would direct your listeners and the people to look at that mythos, to explore that a little bit, and to see for yourself if some of this is true. Because if it is, and I believe it is, then this is our hope. And because I believe in the mythos, to get back on point and on track here, because I believe in that, I believe that these stories, that this one world religious system that E.T. somehow, like this guy Downing believes, was responsible for all the miracles that Yeshua did, completely strip him, Yeshua, of any deity or any claim of deity. And cults will always do the same thing. They deny the work of the cross, and they deny the deity of Yeshua or Jesus. They always do one of two things, and this is exactly what's happening. And furthermore, the reason why I believe the mythos of the Bible is because of the prophetic thread, which is all through all those books, and which to me are being fulfilled in this time that we live in. But they also beg the question, who is writing this stuff, and how is it so accurate? Way more accurate than the fuzziness and the quatrains of Nostradamus or Hopi Indian prophecies, and certainly Jean Dixon and those of her ilk. Mm-hmm. The prophecy and these scriptures are so right on, are so specific, that they defy an answer as to how they got there, except that there is someone that dwells outside our space-time continuum. He did send his son, which was Yeshua or Jesus. He is benevolent. He is good. And he's going to come back at the end of this huge battle, which we're gearing up for, which some people call Armageddon. And thank you for letting me rant.
Not at all, not at all. When I get started, it's tough to get me stopped, too. So just stand out of the way and let you roll. And well spoken and well said. You raised an interesting point earlier that I think needs to be addressed, because it's something that I find a little bit of a stumbling block in, and I believe it's going to happen, because as I look back through prophecy, as you have, Lynn, I see that there are some things that just can't be denied, like Daniel nailing the appearance of Jesus on the scene, to the day.
Exactly.
Right. And even skeptics who say, well, the book of Daniel wasn't written by Daniel, have to admit that the book, at the very least, was attested as being in existence a couple hundred years before the birth of Christ. So whoever wrote it, if it was Daniel or someone writing in Daniel's name, still nailed the appearance of Jesus to the day. So anyway,
to the day.
I find that compelling, as well as the actions of the apostles afterward, especially James and Jude, and those who the apostle John said Jesus' brothers didn't believe in him while he was alive. Okay.
Good stuff.
So I take the prophecies of things to come seriously, and the one world religion is one that plays a central role in the last days, the end times. But as you pointed out, that means you're going to have to get all of these disparate religions together on the same page, and most of them are mutually exclusive. Christians
Correct.
say there is no, Christians say, okay, there is no other way to the Father except through Jesus Christ. Muslims say Allah had no son. How do you get them together under this one world mystery religion?
Well, I think the way to do that, and I write about this in Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, and I realize that this might sound incredibly bizarre, but again, when you have a movie like the Crystal Skulls, which are basically telling us that E.T. seeded us here at panspermia and were responsible for the the Earth's earliest religion. And as I quoted once again to bring up our friend Downing, so I'm not pulling rabbits out of my hat. I'm quoting Downing from his own book. So he already believes on board with the alien gospel. If you have a series of events in the Middle East, which I believe we're gearing up to, which is the fulfillment, I mentioned this earlier, of Ezekiel 38:39 prophecy. And I realize that some people say, well, it's not going to happen now, and you can disagree. That's your prerogative. But I'm entitled to my opinion, and I believe that we're looking at the augmentation of the Ezekiel 38:39 war. It will be with Magog, which is Russia, and Iran, which is Persia, the first and second nations listed very specifically from that Ezekiel 38 prophecy. We see that Iran is certainly in bed with the Ruskies, no doubt about it. They are their benefactors. Russia has said as late as last week, rather, that if you do not touch Iran because you're going to be messing with us. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what the Russians are saying. And we know that the Russians are equipping them. And then we know the whole Hezbollah Syrian connection comes through Iran. I mean, there's just no doubt about this. They are gearing up for this war. Israel, as of last week or 2 weeks ago, created war games, and they flew over 100 planes, F-15s and 16s, sorties up to Greece in mock attack formations with helicopters refueling on the way. Well, the distance between Israel and Greece is about the same distance as Israel to the sites in Iran where the Iranians are building their nuclear sites. So is this a war games in practice of a preemptive strike by the Israelis? They know that they've got about a year before Iran gets the bomb. In my opinion, we're going to see it sooner than later. All that to say, this war is going to happen. And I believe that at the end of the Ezekiel 38:39 war, the Israelis will use what they call their Samson option. And the Samson option, just like the story in the Bible, Samson brings the whole house down upon himself. And the Israelis will realize that they are about to be overrun on all sides by armies that greatly outnumber them. Remember, there's only 8 million Israelis in all of Israel. They are surrounded by millions and millions of hostile neighbors on all sides now. And they will use their neutron bomb, their nuclear arsenal. When they do that, and this is conjecture, this is a scenario on my part. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. I'm saying this is a scenario, but it's one I believe that's well thought out. When this happens and Israel uses their nuclear arsenal to defeat their enemies, which I believe fulfills Ezekiel 38 and 39, we will see the revealing of very large craft in the skies, 2-3 mile wide, maybe even larger craft over the cities of the world. And basically at this point they will say, you have to stop this. We seeded you here. We genetically manipulated here. We were responsible for the world, starting the world's religions, and they will have holographic film of this stuff. How do I know that? Because the abductees are always talking about holographic film. There's actually an article or I should say a story in Kaminsky's book, Flying Saucers, and in that he talks about a scenario in which he believes that certain government officials and clergy were privy to some sort of a holographic film in which the miracles of Jesus and the parting of the Red Sea, all these different miracle events were actually attributed to E.T. And isn't this exactly what Downing is telling us? Remember the Presbyterian minister I quoted from my book? I mean, isn't that exactly what he's telling us? That all the miracles of both the Old and New Testament were created by E.T. So if they show up and if they show up with that kind of craft and they tap into the satellite dishes and the cable networks and everything else, then you start showing, you turn on your television set and there's a group of people in front of this body of water, and you're kind of looking and you're kind of thinking, gee, this looks a lot like the Ten Commandments with Carlton Heston, but I don't think it is. And you see this pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, and it's all aerial shots. And you see the water open up and dry land appear and the water stand on heap, and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm seeing film of the actual event, and it's being shown by the so-called extraterrestrial. And they'll do this with all the religions of the earth, I believe. And I realize how that sounds so far-fetched. It sounds so bizarre. And yet we get a guy like Downing, who I quote in my book, telling us that this is what he believes. So I'm not alone in the belief, and I think that this is, and this is why. Let me just tie it up with this if I can. What is manifesting on the planet more than any other supernatural event on this planet right now, ongoing, continual, and that is the presence of the extraterrestrial craft or UFOs. In Stevensville, the whole UF flopped there. Last week, the Sun and the Telegraph in the UK had testimony and footage and photographs of this extraterrestrial craft that was being chased by a British helicopter. So we see that more and more these extraterrestrial craft are being witnessed or being filmed or being sighted, and they're getting full coverage. And this, of course, I believe, is the coming great deception in the Luciferian endgame, which is that aliens will say that they created us. And these are not aliens, folks. These are demonic entities and fallen angels masquerading as angels or as extraterrestrials to bring about this total falling away and this great deception and the beginnings of this one-world religious system that's spoken about in the book of Revelation. That's my theory.
Now, Lynn, Steven Spielberg, who is the director of the new Indiana Jones movie, this alien contact meme has been a theme of his work for years and years. Indiana Jones, Men in Black 1 and 2, AI, the artificial intelligence. Well, it's not quite ET's there, but of course ET, the extraterrestrial, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, War of the Worlds, the miniseries he produced for Sci-Fi called Taken.
Correct. Right.
This goes back a long time with him, and of course it's not just Spielberg. There are a bunch of others involved in this too. Interesting spin on this with the Arthur C. Clarke work, 2001 and 2010, which interestingly we're getting ready to see the Cassini probe around Saturn here very soon, which was a central theme in 2010. Why the idea of extraterrestrial contact, space brothers coming back to rescue us from ourselves? Why not just a manifestation? I mean, we know from the Bible that Satan himself can appear as an angel of light. Why not appear as an angel of light and say, here I am, I'm your Messiah, instead of going this route with spaceships and ETs and all of this? Well, I mean, that's a really good question. Is it because they need these ships to somehow move between one dimension and another? Which, I mean, I'm not saying that they need that, but what if they do? What if, for instance, demons, in order to manifest in our dimension, must inhabit something? And we know that when we read, once again, biblical stories, and we read that Jesus comes upon a demon-possessed man, and he asks him, what's your name? He says, Legion, we are many. And he casts them into a herd of pigs. When he casts them out of a man, they go into a herd of pigs. In other words, in order to manifest in this dimension, they need something physical to inhabit, whether it's the body of a man or a woman or an animal, which we see they can inhabit, in fact, a herd of swine, which is what they do. So my theory is that the Greys, which look very much like cloned biological bio-body suits, are in fact manufactured. And I realize that just sounds completely crazy to most people. But then you stop and you think that, gee, in 50 years or 60 years since Watson and Crick discovered the deoxyribonucleic double helix spiral, we've mapped the genome, and now we're beginning to play sort of God by manipulating genes and good genes and bad genes in certain people. Just read something about this one particular child will be born without any chance of breast cancer because they've isolated the gene and were able to, when they artificially inseminated the woman with these, they had taken that gene out of the DNA strand, and now this girl will be born without any type of fear of breast cancer because that gene has been eliminated. So if we can do it, why can't Lucifer, who's been around for literally who knows how long, thousands and thousands of years, and in my opinion is a demented genius and is also a super scientist. So he's got a conundrum. He's got the disembodied spirits of a Nephilim from the flood that can't manifest in this space-time continuum, but are earthbound. And he needs them to manifest. So how does he make them manifest? He creates these biological suits. Interestingly enough, and I got this from Strieber's account in Communion, when he's on board the ship and he opens up this large drawer type thing, and in it he sees these like suits. They look just like grays, but they're not moving. And he can't figure it out. And I just went, oh my, they look just like grays, but they're not moving. And he can't figure it out. And I just went, oh my gosh, what if, they're some sort of an interface. They allow the interface between the demonic spirit and this so-called suit
which allows them to manifest in this dimension, which would account for a whole lot of the jerky motions, the fact that they're all clone-like, look all alike, and the fact that they're also indispensable at that point, or dispensable at that point. Who cares? Because it's just a suit that we created. All that's conjecture, can't prove it, but it certainly has some interesting implications, and it's certainly a workable theory. So to get back on point here, the enemy wants to be worshipped. And so if he comes as an angel of light, like Derek, like you're proposing, most people are going to go, well, he's not God, he's just an angel of light. Even if he masquerades, let's say, as Jesus, and kind of creates like a second coming, you're going to have a lot of skeptics there, in my opinion. But if he comes and he says something like this, that we seated you here, which goes very well with Darwinism, by the way. It's
sure.
A slight little rabbit trail. If you've not seen the movie Expelled, highly recommend it. There's a scene at the end of the movie when Ben Stein is talking to Richard Dawkins, and Dawkins is the premier atheist on the planet, defended, vigorously his position. And so Stein asks Dawkins at the very end of the movie, well, if life, where did life come from? Where did the cell come from? Of course, Dawkins has no answer, so he says this, which I about fell out of my chair. He goes, well, maybe millions of years ago in some galaxy far away. And you can see Stein's face. Stein's looking at him. What an intellectually bankrupt argument. In other words, what Dawkins is saying is the whole idea of panspermia, that there was life was seeded through the galaxy from some other galaxy that it exploded or whatever, and here we are, which is exactly what the Mars rover is going to find. They found water and they're going to find life, and wow, we're all seeded here from something. It's all part of the same deal. Everything is moved and calculated to move us away from the belief that somehow the Genesis account of creation, ex nihilo, when God made man from nothing, from the dust of the earth, and breathed life into him. And I believe that. And I know that, you'd say that sounds so far-fetched in science fiction. Is it really? Because when Jesus comes, he destroys, interestingly enough, he destroys the enemy by the breath of his coming. So that same breath has the power to create life, in man, and hold life in man. By the way, there's a thing that's going around on YouTube, which is just fantastic. I forget what it's called. Otherwise,
laminin.
Laminin, right?
Yes.
And it's the stuff that holds the entire universe together, and the code is in the shape of a cross. I mean, you can call it coincidence all you want. It's so deliberate, and we know that from the ancient scriptures, we're told that everything was made and sustained by Yeshua, by Jesus. So it's like, I believe in the Genesis account that we are fearfully and wonderfully created in the image and likeness of God. And so when these guys come here and they show up in the discs and they wow us and zow us, because they will, and anybody who's ever seen one of these things is never the same afterwards, because they are so, in the words of Ricky Searle, who was one of the witnesses at Stevensville, they are so overwhelming. When you look at them, you're just overwhelmed. Your mind is blown when you look at one of these things, especially when they flick the lights on. They give you a light show. You just sit there like the 4th of July. Your mouth drops open, according to Ricky Searle, Stevensville UFO witness, up close and personal. All bets are off. You can never go back to living the same type of life. And this is what I believe is the coming great deception of the Luciferian endgame. This will cause a mega shift, which will create this one world religious system and this one world government. And I believe it's going to happen soon.
What's interesting, Lynn, you mentioned the word shift, and that's a word I've been watching very closely now for the last couple of months, doing some research on it and preparing to do some writing on it. We are being told as evangelical Christians that we need to shift the way we are, and this is coming from the emerging church movement. We need to shift the way we do church. We need to rethink the real message of Jesus Christ when he was here on the planet. It wasn't to save us from sins through his atoning sacrifice on the cross. He was here to heal the sick and feed the hungry and clothe the poor and be nice to widows and orphans and so forth, which was all part of his ministry. There's no question about that. But that was not the ultimate end of his ministry. The people on the shores of of the Sea of Galilee, whom he fed, didn't get it right. They wanted to make him king because he was giving them free bread and free fish.
Right.
And he was very upset and frustrated with them because his kingdom is not of this world. He's looking ahead to the next one. But that's not what we're hearing from the emerging church And it's also not what we're hearing from guys like Rick Warren. And we're seeing this kind of coming together with New Age thought that we can create a heaven here on earth. How does that fit into politics, prophecy, and the supernatural in this coming end times deception?
Well, I think it's certainly another leg of it. That's why it's multifaceted. It once again, the pernicious part of all this is it draws people away from the simplicity of the truth of the Gospels. The centrality of the Gospels works on the cross and the blood sacrifice. And most people don't want to hear about the blood sacrifice, but the blood of Jesus is what brings us in the right standing. It makes us whole, cleanses us from all of our iniquities, and we are now seated, present tense, because he sees us that way, because he knows no space or time like we do. He sees us seated in the heavenlies with him, which is just an amazing piece of scripture when you look at it. So all these, specifically the emergent church, which talks about and waters down the gospel into this fuzzy feel-good thing, which is nothing more than a works trip, to me is once again doing great harm to the centrality of Christianity, which is the cross of Jesus Christ, which is why the Mel Gibson movie was just so amazing, because it really nailed that idea. The Passion of the Christ really nailed the idea down, the sacrifice he made, what he did. And, just as a segue here, and I realize this is a rabbit trail in itself, but when you get into the Shroud of Turin, and I've been sort of an amateur syndologist ever since I was a Christian, which is 28 years now. A syndologist is someone who studies the shroud, and I've read lots of different material on it, and actually interviewed Dr. Wanger, who's been a syndologist, professional syndologist for about 30 years, and written several books on it. And what's amazing about the shroud, in my opinion, it is a calling card. It is Jesus' calling card. God left it here for us to look at and to examine, because the stuff on the shroud and the image on the shroud and the way it got there, there's just no way this is a painted image. I mean, there's absolutely any scientist who looks at this and looks at the preponderance of evidence at the shroud, it's not a painting. They don't know how this thing was made. And I believe it's a calling card. First of all, the nail prints are not in the hands. Like how many times have we seen the nail prints in artwork in the hands? No. The hands would rip open and the bones would be broken. The nails through the bones of the wrist, which is the only place in the arm where you can pierce a man, not break his bones, which fulfills the scripture, right? And yet have him hang there. The two, they've been able to discern from the image of the shroud by magnifying certain areas of the shroud. They were able to see two small coins, which literally are the widow's mites, which are on the eyelids of the body. Okay, and they were only minted in and around Jerusalem between the years of AD 29 and AD 30. There is pollen that is only indigenous to the surrounding area of Jerusalem. There's a flower that they I forget the name of what they call it. It's a botanical name. But basically, it's like they call it like the clock flower, because it tells you the time of day. It blooms, and by the way it blooms, you can tell the time of day by how far the flower is open. Well, that flower, that clock flower, is in the shroud. And when you study the shroud, you can see that flower is open to 3 o'clock. So it's shortly, right after the burial, or right after he was taken down and put into the shroud. There are other implements found in the shroud. For instance, the spearhead that pierced his side, the crown of thorns, the sign that was posted over him. All these, they seem to be remnants of it, which show up in the shroud. The reason for that is that anything that the blood touched was sacred. So that's why all these artifacts are found within the shroud. Interestingly enough, when you reproduce the shroud as a holographic image, which they've done, the shroud image, I should say, does not show the forearms. In other words, when you see the forearms in the shroud, they're covered in blood, so you don't see them. And yet, when you make a holograph of the shroud, guess what you're able to see? You're able to see the actual forearms of the body. And it goes on and on. It's just, in my opinion, it's a calling card. And it shows us that God's Son, Yeshua, Jesus, was and did die for us 2,000 years ago. And he hung on a tree deliberately for our sins. And this is the central message of the Gospels, that he died in our place. And most people don't want to hear that. A lot of people take great offense that God would send his son, and the Muslims, for instance, God does does not have a son, and they don't look at the cross, and most cults say that the cross wasn't necessary, and they take offense at the cross. Even Paul says that 2,000 years ago. So we see that this is what's happening, and the simple message of this has been lost, has been so obfuscated through the centuries that most people don't even get what the idea of the cross and the work of the cross is for us.
No, sadly, most modern Christianity has become bloodless. Lynn, we're right up against the end of our time here, running up against the clock, but we're getting it from all sides, from the culture through movies like the latest Indiana Jones movie, from within our churches, sadly, various movements within modern evangelicalism, and, of course, through the New Age movement, thanks to Oprah Winfrey and her stable of false prophets. And it is...
People lap it up, don't they?
They do, and we appreciate your work in being out there and trying to stand against it and point out the truth. It's not a popular place to be, but it is a necessary one. And we appreciate your book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, and your works of fiction, but grounded in truth, the Nephilim trilogy. Tell people how they can find copies of your books and how they can sign up for your newsletter, Lynn.
Great. Well, we're also going to have a blog, which will be coming up very soon. So check our website, and you'll be directed to the blog. I'll be blogging on that every day. Right now, we also have a special on politics, prophecy, and the supernatural. You say, well, the reason for that is I'm just trying to get the word out. I think it's an important book. It's not being disseminated enough. It's not in many of the bookstores. So we're selling it below Amazon cost at $7 plus shipping and handling. You can go to www.spiraloflife.com, spiraloflife.com, pick up a copy. You can sign up for the newsletter right there at spiraloflife.com. And watch out for the blog because we will be having the blog up soon. And that is, the blog address is lamarzulli.wordpress.com, 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 because there's so much. The reason why I went to the blog, Derek, is because there's so much happening on a daily basis that the newsletter can't cover it all. Yep. And so the newsletter will be more for the interviews that I do, and the blog will be just a daily rant on what's happening. And we'll put links to all of that in the show notes at pidradio.com. Lynn, appreciate your time. Hang on for just a moment here. And again, thank you, Derek. Pleasure to be here. Oh, always a pleasure. We'll have you back again soon. And again, we'll put links to all of the topics covered in today's interview in the show notes at pidradio.com. You'll also find a link there to our forum, the Piercing the Darkness Forum, where you can discuss the conversation today and, of course, anything else that we raised during the hour that we just spent with Lynn Marzulli. Next week, Sharon will be back, and with the annual UFO Festival in Roswell, New Mexico, we will talk with our favorite guy, Guy Malone, next week on PID Radio. I'm Derek Gilbert. Thanks for listening.
News and analysis on demand. This is PID Radio.